In your assignment this week, you will focus on the proper way to review literature, and then you will write a small literature review. To get you started, I'm going to model how I annotate a scholarly article. You read an article, Teaching for Developmental Growth, and the researcher was a higher ed professor who noticed that first-year graduate students were mastering the content set by their professors, but they were not thinking. The researcher wanted to teach for the developmental growth of her learners. So she applied the learning partnership model. In graduate courses, she taught at a university in China. I want you to note that the article contains a literature review. China continues to emphasize rote memorization, and they use a didactic instructional approach. But Chinese educators are seeing the need for reform. They want to learn about critical thinking and innovation. In her literature review, Chen shares research on the learning partnership model and lets her readers know that educational practices are numerous in American higher education. She shares a qualitative study, and then she shares about a mixed methods study. She uses these studies to build up to the problem. When you're looking at an article and you see a study that the author reviewed, you may want to go make a note and go look that study up in the databases and review it. You cannot write about these reviewed studies when you're telling me about Chen's study. APA warns us against using secondary sources in scholarly writing. So if you want to write about something that Chen reviewed, you need to go find that article in the databases in our library. Chen identified a gap in the research. Page 33 of your article tells us that little is known about the effectiveness of the Learning Partnership Model, or LPM, outside of American populations. Chen wanted to investigate the effects of the model on Chinese learners. That was her problem. At the bottom of page 33, Chen begins to tell us how she implemented the LPM model. She disclosed that the university site was one of the top-tier research universities in Shanghai, China. She tells us that she's implementing the model in a graduate-level course where students are becoming consumers and producers of research, just like we want you to become in our program. First, she asked the students to critically evaluate studies on a topic of interest to them. The students had to write literature reviews and describe the procedures those studies had used to collect data. Then students had to develop their own scholarly investigation plan. They had to write a proposal. Yikes! They have to write research questions and develop a plan for conducting research. Does that bring back nightmares of your Foundations in Research course? As you're reviewing a study, you should be marking it up with highlights and writing in the margins as you're trying to make sense of someone else's study. On page 35, I highlighted the purpose statement. I marked the research questions with a big RQ, and I noted that there were 44 participants, ages 20 to 25. I noted in the margin that the researcher kept a weekly journal, and she conducted end-of-course interviews. So I'm marking how she collected the data. When Dr. Chen was ready to analyze her data, she combed through it, looking for patterns and focusing on students' narratives. She mentioned keeping the researchers' minds open to show that they were unbiased. They put codes into categories and developed themes. I noted a little detail that 4 participants were excluded from the study because they wrote about what they had learned instead of how they made meaning of their learning. Chen's next 5 pages tell about her findings. The findings are in bold in the article, but I'm going to practice rewording them in a way that would flow better in a literature review. Remember, I'm modeling what I want you to do. Of course, it's easier to just type out the headings in my literature review, but then I wouldn't be synthesizing the study. I wouldn't be making meaning out of it. I don't want to just write down what somebody else said. It wouldn't make sense in the flow of my paragraphs. So I want to remind you to avoid using someone else's words. So let's try rewording her findings. Number 1, I could say, students acknowledged multiple perspectives and interpretations of one phenomenon. For the second one, I could reword it and say, students reflected that they could set aside their textbooks and use their own knowledge to make judgments. And for her third finding, I could reword it and say, students left the LPM class thinking about the various research methods they had learned. Students were able to discuss the strengths and weaknesses of the research methods. And for her fourth finding, I might reword it and say, students learned that their peers can teach them new ideas, and they realized there is a research community they can correspond with. Ultimately, her findings show the course made a difference. When Chin discusses her findings, she wraps up her research with 2 paragraphs of discussion. She reminds readers that the purpose was not to assess development progress of students in the course, but to study if the learning partnership model pedagogy helped the students develop their own view of research and their own way of making sense of knowledge. When you write your Chapter 5 of your dissertation, your chair will tell you to discuss your findings in light of the research that you reviewed back in Chapter 2. Do your findings align with current research, or did you find something new and different? In Chapter 5 of your dissertation, you will also be asked to tell what your research means. You've conducted this great study. You've discussed your results. Now, what does it all mean? You need to discuss the implications of your study. Chin discusses the implications of her research on pages 42 through 43. She discusses how using the LPM instructional strategy could transform higher education in China. The Teaching for Developmental Growth article is an example of how someone reviewed research on a topic that interests her, and then she conducted a study on that topic. Chin described her participants, told how she implemented the LPM pedagogy, and then she shared her results. Finally, she demonstrated her own thinking skills in the final sections where she discussed her results and then described the implications of her research. When you review an article, you should note the important points just as we did today. Highlight, make notes in the margins. Then use your own words to summarize the research study. Be sure that you achieve a doctoral level of synthesis by examining the literature and then telling how it relates to your topic. If you're nervous about scholarly writing, remember what James chapter 1 tells us. If any of us lacks wisdom, we should ask God, who gives generously to us without finding fault. Wisdom will be given to us. So I encourage you to ask in faith, believing that He will help you. If you need me, remember to shoot me an email or call or text my cell. Blessings on you as you continue to delve into your scholarly articles.